Chapter 21. The Medicine Woman. In the late summer, when Fenris and his apprentice travelled east beyond the Grey Mountains to inspect a boundary seal, they entered country neither of them had passed through before. The forest here was not the willow country of the lake or the managed woodland of Lord Tale's marches. The trees grew at angles that accumulated wrongness slowly, each one plausible alone, the pattern only visible when you stopped and looked back at where you had walked. The air carried copper on it and something else without a name. Fenris moved through it with his instruments and his notes, measuring, adjusting, comparing against his earlier records. The seal was what they had come for. It lay 2 days into the tribal lands, in country where no lord's writ ran and the old ways governed, and where the forest, as Lyra would note later, seemed to be paying attention. The watching. Saya stopped mid-stride, 1 foot suspended above the moss-covered log. The hare she had been tracking vanished into the undergrowth with a flash of grey fur, but she paid it no mind. Her head tilted, nostrils flaring as she drew in the forest air. There. Not the sweet rot of autumn leaves. Not the bitter copper tang that rose from the eastern hollows where the trees grew wrong. This was different. Foreign. The scent of worked leather and metal, of soap made from western tallow, of wool dyed with dyes her people had no name for. Westerners. Here. 3 days' walk past the marker stones. She moved without sound, her deerskin boots finding purchase on the fallen oak as she rose to her full height. From this vantage, she could see through the twisted birch grove to where the strangers would emerge. She did not hide. These were her woods, her meadows, her hunting grounds. She was Saya, medicine woman and hunt speaker of the Kael'dan settlement. If they had come this far past the stones, they would answer to her. The forest floor here was stranger Euros still alive, but changed. Mushrooms grew in spirals that hurt the eye to follow. The bark on the older trees had taken on a faintly mottled appearance, like bruised skin. Small bones littered the ground beneath certain oaks, the remains of animals that had died badly. Her people knew which plants to gather and which to leave untouched, which streams ran clean and which carried the sickness that made children born with too many fingers or none at all. The Westerners, she thought, shivered at the very thought of crossing the Grey Ridge. They called these lands cursed, haunted, forbidden. They marked maps with warnings and sent no tax collectors, no priests, no soldiers. The tribes were left alone in their cursed wilderness, which suited Saya perfectly. And yet here came 2 figures, walking as bold as deer in spring, following the old elk trail that ran toward the standing place. She settled her weight, crossed her arms, and waited. The approach. They appeared first as movement between the silver birch trunks. Euros, a tall figure in dark travel-worn robes and a peculiar wide-brimmed hat, and beside him a smaller form in more practical garb. Young from the way she moved, they walked without the hesitation of those who feared the forest, but with the careful attention of those who respected it. The old one saw her first. He stopped, raised one hand in a gesture that might have been greeting or acknowledgement, and said something to his companion. They turned from their path and began walking directly toward her perch. Saya studied them as they approached. The old man's coat was well made but not finer Euros serviceable wool, dark grey, with the kind of wear that spoke of years of use. His hat was bizarre, a Western affectation that served no purpose she could fathom. He carried a walking stick, plain wood carved with symbols she didn't recognize. The girl Euros, no, young woman Euros, was more interesting. She moved like someone who had spent time in wild places, her eyes scanning the forest floor, noting the unnatural mushroom growth, the odd-colored moss. She wore no bright colors. No jewelry, nothing that marked her as wealthy or privileged. Lean and practical, like a hunter. Not like most soft Western folk Saya had seen on the rare occasions when traders came to the boundary markets. They stopped at the base of her tree, a respectful distance. close enough to speak, far enough to show they understood boundaries. "Good day," the old man called up in the common tongue. His voice was deep, rough-edged, but not unkind. He paused, then added with deliberate formality, "Good weather." Saya said nothing. Let them work for it. The young woman stood slightly behind him, watching, not with fear, but with the careful attention of a student observing her teacher. Or perhaps a Euros. Saya's eyes narrowed. Euros the way a young wolf watches the pack leader. Protective, devoted, something more than mere respect in that watchfulness. The old man seemed to consider, then drew breath and spoke again, this time in Saya's own tongue, the old language of the forest tribes. His accent was terrible, the pronunciation mangled as though his mouth wasn't shaped for the words, but the attempt itself was unexpected. Kaelvan Shah, Vershal Methea, Temval Kresha Euros. He stopped, grimaced, and tried again more slowly. Peace to the speaker of paths. We walk with empty hands. The traditional greeting for travelers seeking passage. Badly spoken, each word forced out like pulling teeth, but recognizable. Saya felt a flicker of surprise. No Westerner had ever bothered to learn even a handful of words. They came with their common tongue and their assumption that everyone should bend to accommodate them. She replied in the common tongue, her own accent thick but serviceable. "You speak our words poorly, old man, but you speak them. This is not usual for your people." He smiled faintly. "I have had the privilege of knowing a few of your people over the years. They were patient teachers, though as you can hear, I was a poor student." "You are far past the marker stones," Saya said flatly. "Western people do not come here. They fear what dwells beyond the ridge. They whisper of curses and rot and spirits that steal children in the night." She let a hard edge creep into her voice. "Why do you not fear these things?" "Oh, I fear them," the old man said calmly. "Fear is a teacher, but fear need not be a master." He gestured with his stick toward the east. "We seek only to reach the standing Placia Euros, the tall structure a day's walk from here. I need to see if it still stands, to make certain observations. We will disturb nothing, take nothing, harm nothing. 2 days hence, we will return this way. You have my word." "Your word," Saya repeated. "I do not know you, Westerner. I do not know the weight of your words." "True enough," he agreed. "Then let me offer proof instead of promises." "The tests." Saya dropped lightly from the log, landing in a crouch that absorbed the impact without sound. She straightened, and for the first time they stood on level ground. She was not a tall woman, but she carried herself like one who had never doubted her right to stand where she stood. "If you wish to pass through Kaelvan lands," she said, "you will show me you understand the way of things. The forest does not care for Western laws or Western gods. It has its own rules. If you do not know them, you will die here. Quickly if you are fortunate." The young woman shifted slightly, her hand moving unconsciously towards something at her belt. Not a weapon, a Euros, a pouch, perhaps. Ready but not aggressive. Good instincts. "What would you have us prove?" the old man asked. Saya pointed to a cluster of mushrooms growing at the base of a twisted oak. "There, tell me which are safe to eat." The old man glanced at them, then shook his head. "None. The ones with the violet caps contain a poison that causes the lungs to fill with fluid. The grey ones will make you see things that are not there, and in your confusion you will wander until you collapse. The white ones," he paused. "The white ones are worse. They will keep you alive long enough to spread their spores through your breath. You become a vessel for their propagation." Saya's expression didn't change, but inside she felt a cold surprise. Most Westerners couldn't tell a death cap from a puffball. This one spoke like someone who had studied, who had learned the hard way. "And the water," she said, pointing to a small stream that burbled over dark stones nearby. "Is it safe to drink?" The young woman spoke for the first time, her voice quiet but clear. "No. The rocks have the wrong color, euros too dark, with that greenish sheen. The water has touched the deep rot. It would take days to sicken you, but it would sicken you all the same." Saya looked at her with new attention. The girl had a good eye. "How do you know this?" "I was taught," she said simply, a glance at the old man. "By one who knows." "Kemval Verash," Saya murmured in her own tongue. "The student carries the teacher's knowledge." She switched back to common. "You know the forest's warnings." "Good. But there is more to walking these lands than knowing which plants will kill you." She closed her eyes, drew in a long breath through her nose, and began to hum. It was a low, droning sound that seemed to come not from her throat but from somewhere deeper, a vibration that resonated in the chest. The old song, the calling song her grandmother had taught her. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the air itself seemed to shift. The oppressive weight that always hung over this part of the forest, euros the sense of being watched, of something vast and old paying attention, euros grew heavier. The birds, which had gone silent when the Westerners approached, began to call again, but their calls were different now, questioning, wary. Saya opened her eyes and looked directly at the old man. "The forest asks who you are. I have opened the way. Now you must answer." To her surprise, he didn't hesitate. He planted his walking stick in the ground, removed his ridiculous hat, and closed his eyes. He stood very still, his breathing slow and measured. Anthena euros so faint she almost missed Eta euros a response. Not words, not exactly a sound, but a presence emanating from him like heat from a stone. The forest shifted, recognized something, not welcoming, not hostile, simply acknowledging. Old, the forest seemed to whisper in her mind. Old and tired and carrying weight. The young woman stood beside him, and Saya felt a different resonance from her. Younger, yes, but bright. Like a clear stream running over clean stones. Devoted, protective, learning. Saya's hands tingled. The test had become something else, something she hadn't intended. This was not fear or respect being offered to the forest. This was communication, as equals. She released the calling song and let the connection fade. The weight in the air eased. The old man opened his eyes and met her gaze, and in that moment she saw it clearly. He has strength, she thought, not the strength of warriors or lords. Something else, something that bends the world without breaking it. "You are not what I expected," she said slowly. "I could say the same of you," he replied. There was no mockery in his voice, only a kind of tired respect. "You are medicine woman, yes, but also more. Hunt speaker, pathkeeper. You hold your people together in a place where the world itself has grown sick." It was not a question, it was recognition. Saya felt a strange sensation in her chest, euros not quite pride, not quite relief. She had been the only one who truly saw for so long, the only one who understood the depth of what was happening to the forest, to the land. Her people trusted her, yes, but they did not always understand. They thought the changes were natural, the way of things. Only she knew the truth was darker, stranger. And this old Westerner, with his terrible accent and his bizarre hat, looked at her and saw what she was, knew what she carried. The permission. "You may pass," Saya said formally. 2 days you have. If you are not back by the third dawn, I will assume the standing place has claimed you, and your bones will feed the forest." "A fair bargain," the old man said. He started to turn, then paused. "The standing place, euros the tall structure. When did you last visit it?" 3 moons past, Saya said. "To gather hawk feathers for ceremony." The structure still stood, but the ground around it has grown difficult. The rot spreads from the base like roots from a tree. I would not linger there. He nodded thoughtfully. We will be careful. The young woman spoke again, her voice hesitant but determined. The forest recognizes him. You felt it. What does that mean? Who is he to the forest? Saya looked at her, then at the old man. You do not know? I know what he is to me, the girl said quietly. Teacher, guardian, friend, but the forest, that was something different. And perhaps more than friend, Saya thought, seeing the way the girl's eyes lingered on him, though maybe she doesn't admit this even to herself. The forest knows those who carry weight, Saya said carefully. Those who hold back what should not be released, who stand in places where others dare not. Your teacher is one of these. The forest does not love him, but it acknowledges the service. She turned to the old man directly. What is it you guard, Westerner? What weight do you carry that even the forest can feel it? For a moment she thought he would not answer. Then he said simply, a boundary. Between what is and what was. Between the world that lives and the world that remembers dying. The words sent a chill down her spine. She understood, in that moment, what he was. Not a lord or a priest or a simple wanderer. He was a keeper, a warden, like her, but on a scale she could barely comprehend. Then I was right to let you pass, she said. Those who keep boundaries understand that some rules cannot be broken without consequence. You will not harm the forest because you know what happens when such harm is done. Just so, he agreed. 2 days, she repeated. I will be here when you return. We will speak more then. I would like that, he said, and seemed to mean it. They turned and continued down the path toward the standing place. Saya watched them go. Euros, the old man with his strange hat and his heavier-than-it-seemed walking stick, the young woman who moved like water and watched him like a hawk guards its nest. Curious, she thought, very curious indeed. The vigil. Saya did not return immediately to her settlement. Instead, she climbed to the high rock that overlooked the eastern valleys, the place where she came when she needed to think and to watch. From here, she could see the standing place in the distance. Euros, a dark line against the grey-green of the corrupted forest, still vertical after all these years. The old tower built by people whose names were lost to memory, standing watch over lands that had slowly turned from living to something else. She had asked the elders what the tower was for when she was young. They had not known. It had simply always been there, a landmark, a place where strange things happened. Birds flew crooked patterns around it. Animals avoided its base. The rot seemed thickest there, as though something beneath the ground was leaking poison upward. But now she understood better. If the old Westerner was what she thought he was, Euros, if he was a keeper of boundaries, Euros, then the tower was not a ruin. It was a marker, a seal. A place where something had been locked away. And he was going to check if the lock still held. 2 days, she thought. If he does not return, I will know the answer. The sun was setting, painting the corrupted forest in shades of purple and grey. In the distance, something that might have been a bird or might have been something else circled the tower 3 times and vanished into the canopy. Saya settled herself on the rock, wrapped her cloak tighter against the evening chill, and began her vigil. She would watch. She would wait. And when they returned Euros, if they returned Euros, she would have many questions. About the tower, about the boundary, about what it meant that the forest itself had recognized him. And perhaps most importantly, about what would happen when the locks finally failed. Because they would fail, she knew that as surely as she knew the seasons would turn. The rot was spreading, the old places were waking, and the world was changing in ways that no medicine woman could heal, no hunt speaker could turn aside. But perhaps, she thought, watching the distant tower fade into darkness, perhaps that old man knows. Perhaps that is why he came. Not to stop €80. Some things cannot be stopped €80, but to measure it. To know how much time remains. The thought should have frightened her. Instead, it brought a strange sort of comfort. She was not alone in her watching. Someone else carried the weight of knowing. Someone else stood guard. 2 days, she thought again. And then we will talk, old man. We will talk about what comes next. Far to the east, beyond the standing place, beyond the corrupted forests and the sick wetlands, the ancient sealed lands dreamed their patient dreams. The miasma stirred in its prison of consciousness and will, testing the boundaries as it had tested them for generations beyond counting. And in a tower on an island far to the west, the wards flickered and held, maintained by one who would not live forever, who was even now teaching another to carry the burden when his time was done. The world turned. The boundaries shifted. The watchers kept their vigil. And in the borderlands between the living world and the dying one, a medicine woman sat on a rock and waited for answers she was not certain she wanted to hear.